Millionaire Cowboy rescues freezing nurse at train station. He turned it into a legend of love. In the brutal snowstorm of winter 1887, Cheyenne's train station became a frozen tomb for those with nowhere left to go. There, a frail figure sat trembling, her face pale, her eyes hollow, as if she had already surrendered. She was Clara Whitmore, a wandering nurse from Boston, carrying in her heart wounds and injustices no one had ever understood. Yet sometimes, in the moment one is closest to the end, life plants a miracle. Matthew Kane, a wealthy rancher, master of sprawling lands, happened to pass by. The very first glance bound their fates together, and from that meeting, in the heart of a storm, a love would be born, growing into a story spoken of for generations. The winter of 1887 had locked Wyoming in a prison of ice. Snowstorms howled, sweeping white dust through Cheyenne's sparse streets. The wind cut like blades against bare skin, carrying a long, ghostly wail. Amid that fury, the Cheyenne depot stood like a cold wooden box, its dim oil lamps too feeble to chase away the chill seeping through every crack. On a damp bench sat Clara Whitmore, curled up with a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. Her breath turned to fragile puffs of white, dissolving in the bitter air. Her lips had gone pale, her fingers stiff, nearly lifeless. In her arms she clutched a worn leather medical bag, her last possession. Inside were a few tools, some gauze, and a nursing certificate from Boston. Close to her chest, tucked in an inner pocket, lay an old photograph of her family. Time had blurred the smiles of her parents and brother, but to Clara it was a flicker of warmth left in a darkened soul. Yet those memories only sharpened her pain. Driven from home by scandal, disgraced and cast out of medicine, she had nothing left but a weary body, a battered heart, and the storm outside, ready to bury her. The depot was deserted. The last train had pulled away 3 hours ago. The next morning's departure was uncertain, with rails already smothered in snow. Clara could hear the wind whistling through the walls, the beams groaning like they might splinter. She drew her ragged scarf tighter, but the cold gnawed through, rattling her bones. Fear ebbed, leaving only numbness. Clara shut her eyes, trying to imagine the gentle light and hurried footsteps of the hospital halls she once knew. But memory was no shelter. All that remained was the faint throb of her heart and the nearness of death. A thought crossed her mind. By morning, they'll find my body stiff on this bench. A tear slid down her cheek, freezing before she could wipe it away. The storm roared on, a young woman with a tattered bag, waiting for a train that would never come. This image alone could silence an audience, pulling their hearts taut. A life so near to ending, yet also the spark of something no one could have foreseen. Hooves thundered against the frozen ground, echoing through the white night. From the haze of snow, a dark shape appeared, a black stallion, mane whipping wild, carrying a man cloaked heavy, brimmed hat shadowing his face. That figure cut across despair like a scene carved by fate itself. The man reined in, boots crunching deep into the snow as he dismounted. He swung the depot door wide. Wind and snow burst inside, rattling the lamps. His eyes swept the empty room and stopped at Clara. She trembled, mute, clutching her bag. "Lord above!" His voice was deep, urgent, laced with a Texas drawl. "Another minute here, and you'd be ice." He strode forward, knelt before her. Pulling away her thin scarf, he saw lips blue, skin ashen. Without a word, he stripped off his fur-lined coat and draped it around her. The warmth still held his breath. Clara let out a faint sigh, the dull glaze in her eyes softening. "Name's Matthew Kane, Triple K Ranch, 20 miles out," he said briskly, steady as a rock. "Think you can stand?" Clara shook her head. Her legs were stone. Without hesitation, Matthew scooped her into his arms. She weighed nothing, trembling against the strength that held her. He carried her through the storm, step by iron step. His stallion reared, then cut a path straight toward town. Minutes later, they burst into the Cattleman's Hotel, the only place still lit against the winter night. Silence fell. Every eye turned to the towering cowboy carrying a woman near collapse. Heat flushed her cheeks at last. As Matthew called for blankets, a middle-aged man shot to his feet, staring in shock. "Good heavens! Aren't you the nurse who saved my boy in Boston last year? He was burning with fever. Nobody thought he'd live. But you brought him back from the very edge." The room stirred. Clara froze, eyes wide. Matthew glanced down at the woman in his arms, realizing she was no ordinary stranger. In that moment, light pierced the frozen night. Clara Whitmore, disgraced and forgotten, carried within her a reputation unspoken until now. Recognized, confirmed, undeniable. And from that recognition, a new road opened before her. The fire in the Cattleman's Hotel hearth crackled warm, golden light across the wooden walls, casting Clara's shadow in flickering shapes. After the storm outside, this heat felt nothing short of a miracle. Wrapped in thick blankets, she still trembled, but color had returned to her cheeks. Matthew Kane stood nearby, broad and steady as a wall, his gaze fixed on her with a focus he hardly tried to hide. A young bellboy brought a tray of steaming tea. Matthew poured it himself and set the cup into Clara's hands. "Drink. You'll feel better," he said, his voice low and firm. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, trembling still. That fleeting touch sent her heart into an unsteady rhythm. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the storm still howling at the windows. Then Matthew's eyes dropped to the worn leather bag she had refused to let go of since she entered. "I saw the tools in your case, Chasung," he said. "You're a nurse, aren't you?" Clara hesitated, then nodded faintly. "I trained in Boston, worked in a hospital, but now, no place will take me." Her voice faltered, heavy with shame and grief. Matthew leaned forward, resting one hand on his knee. "Back east, they may dismiss you. But out here in Wyoming, a trained nurse is worth gold. Most folks rely on quacks or whiskey-swilling cowboys patching themselves up. I've lost good men because there wasn't anyone with the skill to save them." Clara looked up, caught in the fire of his eyes. In them was more than truth. There was need, conviction. "Clara Whitmore," Matthew said, her name slow and deliberate. "I want you at Triple K Ranch. I'll see to your lodging, food, everything you need to practice. All I ask is you do what you were born for. Save lives." The words struck like a thunderclap. Clara's heart hammered. A part of her longed to accept instantly. Shelter, purpose, perhaps even protection. Yet doubt clung stubbornly. "Why trust me?" "You don't know me," she whispered. Matthew didn't flinch. "I don't need anyone's word. I saw the way you held that bag, like it was your whole life. Anyone who clings to that fire in a blizzard deserves my trust." Clara bit her lip, her eyes glistening with the war inside her. At last, as the wind outside howled fiercer, she let out a sigh. "All right. I'll try." A rare smile creased Matthew's weathered face, deepening the lines around his eyes in a way that only made him look more genuine. "Then it's settled," he said. "From now on, Triple K will have its healer. And maybe I just found what I've been waiting for all along." By midday, the storm had eased. Heavy gray clouds drifted slow across the cold Wyoming sky. Clara sat astride Matthew's horse, holding tight as they left Cheyenne behind, riding north toward the valley where Triple K spread wide beneath the snow. The trail stretched endless, the wind still biting, but it no longer struck terror in her chest. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope had been lit. The road was rough. Ice made the horse stumble more than once, forcing Matthew to slow. He pointed out markers as they rode. Beyond that ridge of pines lies the valley. Come spring, it'll be a sea of wildflowers. His deep voice carried steady through the frozen expanse, and for the first time in months, Clara felt a calm settle in her restless soul. But peace was short-lived. On a narrow stretch of trail, a cry tore through the wind. A young cowboy, wrestling with a bucking horse, was thrown hard onto the frozen ground. A sickening crack followed. He clutched his arm, face white with agony. Matthew swung down at once, but Clara was faster. She rushed to the boy's side, her voice clear and commanding. "Don't move him!" she snapped, sharp enough to halt Matthew in his tracks. Her hands moved swift and sure, feeling the arm bent at a wrong angle. Broken, but clean. "I need cloth, a branch, anything solid." Matthew handed her a saddle strap and a dry limb from the roadside. Clara worked with calm precision, binding the limb tight against the boy's arm, setting the bone with practiced force. His cries rang out, raw with pain, but when it was done, sweat poured from his brow and his breathing steadied. Clara wiped the blood from his skin, her eyes focused, her manner unshakable. "You'll be fine," she told him firmly. "Stay off the horse a few weeks, and it'll mend." Tears of relief welled in the young man's eyes as he muttered his thanks. Matthew laid a hand on Clara's shoulder, voice low with awe. "Now I know. I just brought a miracle to Triple K." But while they tended to the boy, far off on the ridge, a shadow lingered. A figure cloaked in wool, brim of his hat pulled low, studied them through a spyglass. His eyes were sharp, cold. Lowering the glass, he smirked faintly, fingers brushing the grip of his revolver as if weighing a choice best saved for later. Clara didn't see him. Not yet. But it was clear. Her ride to Triple K Ranch carried more than new beginnings. It had stirred ghosts from her past, and they were already on her trail in this wild, unforgiving West. Triple K Ranch rose before Clara like another world entirely, nothing like the cramped streets of Boston. The main lodge, built of dark pine, stood firm against the snowy valley. Around it stretched horse stables, granaries, bunkhouses, and fences that seemed to run forever. Hundreds of cattle bawled, their voices mixing with the smoke drifting from the cookhouse chimney, the air heavy with the scents of dry hay, horse leather, and resinous pine. Clara clutched her worn medical bag tighter. This place would either prove her worth or swallow her whole. On her very first day, a cowboy caught a lash of rope across his cheek, tearing a long gash. Blood poured as he howled like he'd lost half his face. Clara did not flinch. She laid out clean cloth, poured whiskey, and her needle flashed steady in the lamplight. The men gathered round, skeptical, eyes wide. But each stitch was neat, strong, certain. When she tied the last knot and bound the wound, she told him firmly, "It'll heal. Keep it clean. Stay out of the whiskey." The young man nodded sheepishly. The others whispered, "She sews like a real doctor." By the third day, she was called to the cattle barn. A heifer was in hard labor, 2 cowboys sweating and useless at her side. Clara waded in, steadying her breath, ordering the men to hold the animal down. Her hands moved, turning the calf inside the womb. Sweat ran down her neck, but her eyes stayed calm, unshaken. At last, the bleat of a newborn calf filled the barn. The cowboys cheered like children. One muttered in disbelief, "We owe her a whole damn feast." That night, in the smoke-filled bunkhouse for the first time the men made space for Clara, handing her a hot cup of coffee. They told their trail stories without the suspicion of the first days. Clara listened, smiling faintly now and then, the weight of months of scorn easing at last. But the true test wasn't only blood or cattle, It was facing the rough edges of frontier men, gruff, hot-tempered, sometimes crude. Whenever one tossed out a joke too sharp, Clara didn't shrink or flare. She simply met his gaze, eyes steady as still water. That quiet pride made them falter, drop their eyes, and fall silent. Within a week, Matthew noticed the change. The hard-headed hands now listened to the nurse from Boston. They came not only with wounds, but headaches, sleepless nights, even questions about writing letters home. Her presence had become an anchor, something the ranch had never known. In the heart of the Wild West, Clara Whitmore, the woman cast out of civilized society, was proving her worth. Step by step, winning the trust of men who believed only in guns and grit. Then came the true trial. That afternoon, wind swept through the valley, carrying smoke from the cookhouse fires. Clara was noting down the cowboy's minor injuries when a frantic shout tore through the air. "Tommy! Lord help us! Horse kicked him in the chest!" Clara sprinted to the stable. On the straw and mud floor lay young Tommy, pale as death, gasping raggedly. His chest was caved on one side, blood bubbling at his lips. The horse that struck him was still being dragged away, its hoofprints stamped deep into the ground. "Clear out!" Clara dropped to her knees, hands quick on his chest. Ribs broken, lung crushed. If nothing was done, he'd be gone within the hour. The men looked on, frozen in fear. One stammered, "We'll ride for the doctor in Cheyenne." "No time!" Clara cut him off, her voice like steel. Her eyes burned so fiercely that silence fell. "If we wait, he'll be dead before sundown." Matthew appeared, thrusting her bag into her hands. "Tell me what you need." His voice was low, steady, full of trust. "Boiled water. A lamp. Hold his arms. I have to cut him open right here." The bunkhouse men stiffened, the air thick as a noose. Clara sliced Tommy's shirt away, revealing a bruise spreading black across his chest. With her scalpel, she made a clean incision, blood spurting as pressure released. Tommy's breath rattled easier at once. The men stared, horrified and awestruck. As she wiped the wound, preparing to stitch, her hand froze. Along his ribs lay an old scar, thin, cruel, unmistakable. Not the mark of accident, but of a lash or binding leather. Clara's chest tightened. Tommy stirred, eyes half open in fevered delirium, whispering, "Don't take me. Don't." A chill cut down her spine. This was no simple ranch boy. That scar, those words, too close to the rumors she'd heard back in Boston. Whispers of children trafficked west, sold like cattle. She forced her hands steady, finished stitching, wrapped the wound tight. "He'll live," she declared, her voice drained but certain. The men erupted in cheers, relief flooding the stable. Matthew's eyes shone with fierce pride as he looked at her. But Clara's heart carried a new weight. That scar, those words, they told of shadows darker than storm or wild horse. In the wide, rugged safety of Triple K Ranch, a hidden truth had surfaced. And Clara knew the West would test her with far more than snowstorms and stampedes. Nights at Triple K Ranch held a silence all their own. After long days filled with the bawl of cattle, the crack of whips and the thunder of hooves, once the sun sank behind the mountains and shadows swallowed the valley, there remained only the chirp of crickets and the faint smell of hay carried on the prairie wind. Clara often sat on the porch of her small cabin, cup of hot tea in hand, gazing up at a western sky spilling over with stars, so vast it seemed to swallow the world whole. And nearly every night, Matthew came. He never stepped right up at first. He would lean against a post, boots caked in dust, hat in his hands. They began with simple talk. The weather, the newborn calves, a wound she'd stitched. Slowly, their words wandered deeper. Clara spoke of Boston, of the hospital halls full of suspicion and pressure. Matthew spoke of his youth, riding far and wide to expand his ranch. One evening, Clara asked softly, Why does a man like you, wealthy, powerful, still live alone out here?" Matthew was quiet a long moment. The wind sighed through the pines, whispering like ghosts. At last he said, "I had a wife once." Clara's eyes widened. He sank onto the steps, turning his hat in his calloused hands. Her name was Rebecca. We grew up together in Texas, married when I was barely 20. But typhoid fever took her after only 3 years. Since then, I told myself I'd never open my heart again. His voice dropped low, rough, as if scraped from the bottom of his soul. Clara sat silent, the lantern light painting sharp shadows across his face, lines carved deep with grief. In that moment, she saw not just a rancher, not just the solid pillar the cowboys leaned on. She saw a man who had bled loss, who longed for peace he could never find. "But you're different," Matthew said at last, turning to meet her eyes. Rebecca was gentle, fragile. "You, Clara, you carry a strength I can't ignore. I saw it when you stitched up the boys, when you brought that calf into the world, when you faced their jeers with nothing but proud silence. That strength," he paused, breath catching. "It makes me want to believe again." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. Her heart trembled. How long had it been since she'd heard words like that? Words not meant to wound or exploit, but to bare a man's soul. That night, under the endless stars, with only wind and the scent of wild grass, between them, an unseen bond tightened. No vows, no promises, just understanding and truth. And like the rugged land around them, their love took root, quiet, but unshakable. Word of Clara's surgery on Tommy spread like wildfire across Triple K. A boy nearly crushed to death beneath a horse's hooves now breathed easy again, all thanks to her hands. The men who once doubted now spoke her name with reverence. That evening, as the sun spilled red across the mountains, Matthew sought her out on the porch. He wore no dusty ranch clothes, but a clean shirt, his hair neatly combed. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were softened. "Clara," he began, his voice deep, unsteady with emotion. "Since the night I pulled you from that station, my life hasn't been the same. And today, watching you fight for Tommy's life, I knew I couldn't wait any longer." Clara turned. Her pulse quickened. His hand closed over hers, strong but trembling. "I lost a wife once. I thought my heart would never open again. But you've brought hope back to this ranch, and to me. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me?" The air thickened, as if the whole valley held its breath. Clara stepped back, hands shaking, her eyes flashing with terror and despair. The ghost of Samuel Pierce, the man she thought she had buried in the East, had risen again. With the deadliest weapon of all, power cloaked in words and papers. Matthew Kane would not stand idle. He stormed to the stables, seizing the reins of his horse. "If Pierce dares set foot in Cheyenne, I'll look him straight in the eye." His voice was tight, bristling with fury long denied, aimed at every force that had ever wounded Clara. Clara caught his coat, pleading, "Don't! You don't know him. Pierce doesn't fight with guns. He fights with lies, with seals and signatures. Back east, that destroyed me. But out here," Matthew's eyes hardened like steel, "men don't just listen. They see. And they've seen you save half this town." That very night, word spread. A hearing would be held at dawn. Pierce arrived polished in a black suit, bowler hat gleaming, presenting himself as a medical representative from Boston. He carried papers accusing Clara of practicing without license, of moral violations, even dredging up a scandal he himself had spun. The courthouse filled, townsfolk spilling into the square. Mothers Clara had saved, men she had patched up, stood shoulder to shoulder. But Pierce's honeyed words rattled them, doubt seeping into the crowd. When Clara entered, pale but resolute, silence fell. Pierce's voice dripped false concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hold no personal grudge. I only wish to shield you from untrained hands. In Boston, she was stripped of her right to practice. Here she will bring only disaster." Clara stood tall, gripping her scarf tight. Her voice shook, but it rang clear. "I did not come west to hide. I came because I had nowhere left. I have never harmed a soul. These people know I have bled with them, fought for their lives. If my hands are stained, it is with blood I tried to keep in beating hearts." A voice broke from the crowd. "That's the truth." Another followed, then more, until the square roared. Scarred faces, mothers with babes, cowboys whose lives she saved, all rose for her. Pierce faltered, eyes darting for escape. But he had one more card. He raised a letter bearing Boston's seal. "Here is proof. Clara Whitmore once let a patient die under her hands. Signed, sealed, her guilt undeniable." Gasps rippled. Clara swayed, vision blurring. Then Matthew's voice thundered, "I know that case. The man died by fate, not her hands. I was there. I saw her fight death till the last breath. If anyone calls her guilty, look me in the eye and call me a liar." The crowd stilled. Pierce froze, unable to meet Matthew's blazing stare. An old townsman rose, cane pointed at Pierce. "We know who we trust. You bring papers and slick talk. Out here we trust what we've seen." "Trust Clara!" someone shouted. The chant rolled like thunder, drowning Pierce's voice. Pale, defeated, Pierce fled the courthouse, his glare a silent vow of battles yet to come. Clara's tears flowed, not of shame but release. Matthew took her hand before them all. "He may carry the East's papers," he declared, "but out here the people's hearts have chosen. And so have I." The crowd erupted, voices carrying across the prairie. And Clara realized. Her past no longer held its chains. The proposal she hadn't answered now echoed in her heart, stronger than ever. Amid the uproar of Cheyenne, a love tested by fire and lies blazed bright, like the dawn breaking across the Wyoming plains. The courthouse in Cheyenne was packed to the rafters. There was no blizzard that day, but inside the air was thick, every breath weighted by tension. Ranch hands, blacksmiths, housewives, even children pressed in shoulder to shoulder, eager to witness a trial the frontier had never seen. A nurse accused of practicing without license. Samuel Pierce stood before the bench with smug confidence. His black suit was crisp, his white collar spotless, hair slicked to a gleam. He held a stack of papers in his manicured hand, voice sharp as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen." This woman, Clara Whitmore, was dismissed from a Boston hospital for gross violation of medical ethics. Yet here she is, calling herself a nurse, cutting and stitching, endangering lives. This is not just contempt for the law. It is a clear threat to the people of Wyoming. He paused, flashing a sneer, his eyes sweeping the crowd in challenge. A murmur rippled, but most waited in silence. Clara sat in the defendant's chair, her hands clenched white. Memories of humiliation in Boston flooded back. But when she lifted her gaze, she saw Matthew, standing tall, steady as stone, his eyes locked on her like a flame against the dark. "Is there any witness to support these charges?" the judge asked. Before Pierce could speak, a gravelly voice rang out from the back. "I am." Every head turned. It was Tom Bradley, foreman of Triple K Ranch. Dust still clung to his hat, but his eyes burned bright. "I testify, not against her, but for her." Clara Whitmore cut open my boy Tommy's chest and saved him. He lives today because of her gasps swept the room. Tommy himself, still bandaged, stepped forward, voice trembling. If not for Clara, I'd be dead. I owe her my life. A woman pushed through next, clutching her child. My baby was dying of fever. Dr. Pierce was nowhere to be found, but Clara saved him. Other mothers nodded, tears streaking their cheeks. Then Doc Williams, the town's old physician, adjusted his spectacles and spoke. Your Honor, I watched her work. Her skill equals any trained doctor. Wyoming needs healers with her heart more than it needs titles without conscience. The room erupted, waves of voices crashing like thunder. Cowboys from Triple K rose one by one, hats in hand, swearing their faith in Clara. Even children piped up, Miss Clara patched us up. Pierce flushed red, sputtering, but the chant began. Justice for Clara! Justice for Clara! For the first time in years, Clara's eyes brimmed not with shame but with tears of belonging. She was no longer alone. This time the West itself stood with her. The judge pounded his gavel, calling the room to order. Silence fell heavy. Clara's heart pounded every moment of her life. Her disgrace in Boston, her flight west, tightening into this single instant. In a voice deep and measured, the judge declared, after reviewing the evidence and considering the testimony of this community, this court hereby recognizes Clara Whitmore as a licensed nurse within the territory of Wyoming. The accusations of Dr. Samuel Pierce are dismissed in full. The courthouse exploded. Cheers, applause, hats tossed high. Matthew leapt to his feet, gripping Clara's shoulders, his eyes shining. Clara covered her mouth as tears spilled free. This victory was not hers alone. It belonged to every soul trampled once by lies and power. Pierce staggered, preparing to protest, when another figure rose from the back. The stranger who had shadowed Clara on her way to Triple K dusty coat, weather-beaten face, eyes sharp as steel. He strode forward, voice rough but resolute. I have one more word to say. The crowd hushed. Pierce stiffened. The man removed his hat, revealing streaks of gray in his hair and tired but unyielding eyes. My name is Robert Hayes. Last year, my daughter was crushed in a wagon accident. No doctor in Boston believed she'd live, but Clara Whitmore saved her. She asked no payment, wanted no praise. When they smeared her name, she walked away in silence. To me, she is no fraud. She is a hero, whispers rippled like wildfire. Robert's words cut clean through Pierce's mask. The judge fixed a hard stare on him. Do you answer to this, sir? Pierce stammered, sweat beading. He lies. She's a fraud. Enough. The judge's gavel slammed down like a rifle shot. The evidence, the witnesses, the truth are plain. Dr. Pierce, instead of protecting patients, you sought to destroy a woman out of spite. Wyoming has no place for the likes of you. Leave this land, before its people cast you out themselves. Throw him out! Voices roared. Pierce's face drained of blood. Under a storm of contempt, he slunk toward the door, the crowd parting only to spit their hatred. Clara turned to Robert, tears brimming. He only nodded, a faint smile softening his weary face. Justice has finally smiled on you, his eyes seemed to say. Matthew clasped her hand, voice steady above the roar. You see now? They know who you are. No ghost from the east can haunt you again. And in that moment, Clara understood. She had not only been vindicated, she had reclaimed her honor. Before her stretched not exile, but the wide open road of the West. The wedding day of Matthew Kane and Clara Whitmore rose like an anthem across the wide frontier. From dawn, the valley of Triple K Ranch buzzed with a spirit unlike any other. Riders poured in from every direction, ranchers from distant ranges, townsfolk from Cheyenne. even newspapermen who had ridden trains all the way from Chicago. They had come not just to see a wealthy rancher wed, but to witness the marriage of a woman who had become a living symbol of courage and mercy on the frontier. The broad yard before the main lodge was strung with wildflowers gathered from the open range. Garlands of white and yellow draped across fences, long tables groaned beneath roasted beef, loaves of bread, and jugs of sweet whiskey. The strum of banjos mingled with laughter until the whole place throbbed like a springtime festival. When a small bell rang, all eyes turned to the wooden walkway lined with pine planks. Clara stepped forward in a simple white dress, her hair adorned with prairie blossoms. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes shining with emotion and modesty. Yet every step was steady, as if each footfall declared she was no longer the shivering woman from the Cheyenne depot, but a woman honored by a community. Matthew stood waiting at the lodge steps, clad in a sharp black suit. Broad-shouldered, weathered, but his face beamed with a rare joy. When their eyes met, the crowd hushed, leaving only the unspoken vow shining between them. The frontier preacher's voice rose, plain but solemn. "Do you vow to love, to shield, to walk beside this one, whether rich or poor, in health or in sickness, until your final breath?" "I do," Matthew thundered without hesitation. Turning to Clara, the words were repeated. She lifted her chin, her voice clear and resolute. "I do." Applause cracked like gunfire across the yard. Matthew bent and kissed her to a roar of cheers. Cowboys whistled, women dabbed their eyes, children laughed and dashed between the tables. "Forever and always," the words carved into a wooden sign above the lodge porch, gleamed in the afternoon sun, sealing the vow in timber and light. In that moment their love became more than two hearts bound together. It became the story of the West itself, proof that love could bloom even after the fiercest winter storm. Years rolled on. Fateful wedding day. From Triple K, a valley was carved and named Kane's Valley, after the man who helped reshape the frontier. Matthew and Clara did not just build a life, they built a legacy. The once humble lodge now stood at the heart of a bustling town. Children played in the dirt roads, shops lined the street, church bells rang, and the hospital Clara founded rose as its proudest jewel. It was the first of its kind in the territory, drawing families from all over Wyoming for healing. Clara also trained young women as nurses, sowing seeds of compassion and skill for generations to come. Matthew expanded the ranch, but more than a cattle baron, he became a leader, shielding the weak, guiding settlers, and opening the valley to prosperity. From a handful of cowhands, Triple K grew into the center of the territory's life, its economy, its politics, its culture. They raised 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Thomas, the eldest, carried his father's iron will. Samuel, the second, bore Clara's gentle eyes and hands. And little Elizabeth, with her radiant smile, became the joy of the entire valley. As time passed, the names Matthew and Clara Kane reached far beyond Wyoming. Papers in Chicago, New York, even London, printed their story, a legend proving that in the Wild West, love and justice could flourish side by side. When their final days came, they passed within months of one another, hand in hand. The people of Kane's Valley laid them side by side on the hill overlooking the land they had built, where aspens whispered and sunsets blazed across the valley. On their headstone carved in plain letters, "Forever and always." And folks say when the evening sun sinks low, its last rays catch those words in firelight, reminding all who pass that love can outlast every storm and mercy can shape history. To this day, travelers journey to Kane's Valley. They visit the hospital, the nursing school, and climb the windy hill where the Kanes lie. There, they tell the tale of Matthew and Clara, 2 ordinary souls who left behind an undying legend beneath the Wyoming sky. On the windy hilltops of Wyoming, their love story rests like an endless ballad, From a night of despair in a blizzard, they wrote a legend of love, faith, and compassion, leaving a legacy that outlives time. The stone carved forever and always is not just for them, but for us all, a reminder that true love can weather any storm. Do you believe that in every life there's a blizzard night, leading us to our light? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this tale touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share, so more may hear of this Western legend of love.